Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this very important topic of equity. This is the first of our equity town halls that we are putting together to inform our SDOL community, especially our parents, about the work that we are doing here in SDOL. Next slide, please. As you know, our mission is to ensure that every child receives an excellent education. Our vision is that every child will be academically and emotionally prepared to successfully enter college or the workforce. Our work around equity is fully aligned to this mission and vision to ensure that we look at every single student, especially our historically underserved students, to ensure that there is access and opportunity for all of our students. We started this work about 3 years ago, and it is work that will continue this year and the next, because we truly believe that what we do with our students will impact them for the rest of their life. So thank you again for joining us. We have a wonderful program and we will be taking questions. So I want to introduce you now to Crystal Martin, who is the Supervising Coordinator of Student Services, who has taken the lead on this magnificent program. Crystal?
Thank you, Dr. Rao. It's good to see so many people on today. You represent who we are, and we are thankful that you are here. 2 years ago, we began a journey in equity training with our staff. We have a representative group from every building and every department in the district. We have about 160 teachers, principals, administrators, secretaries, support staff, and some community members that are being trained on how to turn around the training to the rest of the staff. So we meet on Saturdays throughout some Saturdays in the last couple of years, and we turn the training around that we learn to others. We're really fortunate to have a partnership with Corwin, and one of the ladies, part of Corwin, is here today. Her name is Nicole Law, and she'll be on and share with you some of the things that administrators and teachers and secretaries and all our staff are learning. So you'll have a chance to participate today in what we are doing. I do want to say that if you want this mess to be translated, you have a choice at the bottom of your screen to join a group for it to be interpreted in Spanish, in Arabic, or Swahili. We may forward you that opportunity. There are also folks here today to represent the district. And so if you have a question and you put that in the chat, we will respond to you. We also have a group of people that are helping to lead this work in the district, and they will be here also at the end of the time with Nicole. They will introduce themselves to you so that you can hear what they are doing and how they're helping to improve the lives of the students in our district. I'm going to introduce to you Nicole Law, our partner in equity with Corwin. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, and hello, families and community members of School District of Lancaster. I am so excited to be here with you today, and I can commend you, Dr. Rao, and your team for all of the work that you're doing around equity. Next slide, please. So when we think about deep equity is a professional transformation, and I wouldn't even call it a program. It is a framework that we engage with staff, and we even have a student vein that Mr. Hanson is going to share with us a little bit later. But we're looking at how do we embed a process where we look at the personal, professional, and organizational transformation all around equity. When we think about equity, and next slide, please, we consider what is the purpose of our work? And so when we look at the deep equity framework, there are three big ideas when we consider the deep equity framework. That first big idea is all around being culturally competent. And when we're culturally competent, we have the skill and the will to form authentic and relationships, effective relationships, inviting relationships across differences. And when we think about differences, we're talking about how students show up, how families show up with identity markers and various dimensions of identities. And when we think about cultural competence, we know that it is ongoing work. It is ongoing work that involves inner work as well as the outer work, which we call professional practice. When we think about that professional practice, we consider how are we culturally responsive educators? Are we culturally responsive to our staff, to our students, and community members? When we think about culturally responsive teaching and culturally responsive pedagogy, we look at instruction and how it impacts all of our students across their dimensions of identities. And when we think about culturally responsive pedagogy, we want to ensure that teachers, educators have in their professional toolkit strategies and structures and processes and practices that are culturally relevant and responsive to the students with whom we serve. When we think about academic achievement, we know that that is at the forefront of everything that we do. Considering how are students showing up in levels of engagement? Are they behaviorally engaged? Are they engaged cognitively? And are they engaged emotionally? And when we think about academic achievement, we know that that is interdependent on their citizenship, how they show up socially to serve their community and to serve each other. Next slide, please. When we think about the deep equity framework, the deep equity framework consists of three major concepts, and we call these the key concepts of equity. And that first concept is, next slide, all around inclusion. And I love this. And I want to read it just like it appears on the slide. That students and employees, we could even add, and we should add, families, community members, our parents, feel welcome, seen, safe, cared for, understood in their cultural identity, that they don't have to check who they are. They don't have to play give it up. They can come to class, to school in the fullness of who they are. And so when we think about feeling welcomed and seen and safe and cared for and understood, the deep equity framework, we create opportunities to engage with what are systems and structures and strategies to think about how we can intentionally put in place those moves to ensure that we have inclusion. The next key concept, next slide, please. When we hear comments such as, I don't see color, or I don't see differences, we believe in educating staff members and our participants to really know and embrace that differences make a difference. And they don't have to get in the way, that we create opportunities to tap into who students are, and we don't pretend that they don't exist because we don't want to get in the way. And I love that direct quote from Gary Howard, because oftentimes the intent is, I don't see color, I embrace all of my students, and that intent is a very positive and nurturing intent. On the flip side of it, We don't want students to have to check who they are. When we think about the next concept that is all around, and next slide, please, equity. And we hear a lot about equity. So what does equity mean to us in the deep equity process? We look at educational disparities that have existed. We heard Dr. Rao talk about populations that have been historically marginalized, systemically oppressed. So when we consider equity, we look at educational disparities based on all dimensions of identity, such as race and economics, sexuality, gender. They're reduced and eliminated. And we look at positive outcomes, making sure that we equally distribute those outcomes and resources for all students, regardless of their identity group. And those negative outcomes, such as discipline and exclusionary practices, and students who are not performing at high levels or have access and exposure to rigor, that those negative outcomes are reduced for groups that have been, again, historically marginalized. And so that's what equity means to us in the deep equity process. The next slide, when we consider excellence, excellence is keeping the bar high for all of our students so we can promote that democratic citizenship and empower our students and our families in the perseverance of who they are in their culture, in their individual representations. And we look beyond test scores and we think about that whole child, that whole individual, and making sure that we nurture the substance of who they are, the depth of who they are, how they think and cognitively interact with the world around them. And it's more than just compliance. This is deep-seated relationships that we're forming, and we're cognizant of those spaces that we're creating where we really believe that there is excellence for all. Next slide. When we think about excellence, we want to ensure that our scholars are college and career ready, definitely. We also believe that when our students graduate from SDOL, that they're culture ready, where they can embrace perspectives of others, they can identify who they are and their representations, and they have been strengthened by SDOL members of the educational staff to be fortified in who they are. And we do this through 5 phases. Next slide, please. And those 5 phases are cycles of change. And so the educators that have taken part, and then we heard Dr. Martin share that there are turnaround strategies. So we think about this work in 5 phases. And those phases are not linear, they're cycles of change. Next slide. The phases are deeply rooted in tone and trust. We know that a lot of the equity work can be rooted in shame and blame, or there are notions that if we have equity conversations, that I'm going to be shamed and blamed. And so we create spaces centered around tone and trust. So as educators and staff members, as they embark on this journey, is centered in that tone and that relational trust. And so that is one of the phases that will show up in all 5 phases. The phase that we have had a lot of fun with is that personal journey, personal culture, where we believe and we elevate that everyone has a personal journey and a personal culture. Then we've tapped into the phase of social dominance and to social justice, knowing that we want to create spaces where we can mitigate, we can disrupt and interrupt systems of inequity. Then we look at the instructional framework through our culturally responsive practices. And those you will hear me talk about shortly, where they're embedded in responsive practice to individual students as well as the collective, that community of learners. And then we know that we have to have systemic transformations. We want this work to be sustained. The investment that your school district has made around the promise of equity, it has to be sustained. And that's when we plan for change and we think about those structures that will allow us to see this work years to come. Next slide, please. The 7 principles of culturally responsive teaching are centered in forming those authentic and caring relationships. Next slide. The 7 principles are: students are affirmed for who they are. Teachers create welcoming spaces centered around students' cultural identities. And the classroom is culturally and physically inviting. And we call these first 3 principles the front porch. And I want you to think about front porches and what they signify, especially if we go just a little south of Pennsylvania and we step into some of the states like South Carolina, North Carolina. And we know that front porches signify warmth, care, and concern. And we want our students to feel that when they come into our classrooms and they come into the school building as a whole. The next, we call it in the kitchen, because we're cooking up awesome instruction for all students. So they can see themselves in the content, they can see themselves and make connections in the instruction. And so those principles, the 4th one is learning is reinforced in positive ways. And we don't just look at academics and achievement, but we look at performance. We look at progress. We look at different ways of students showing what they know. Then principle 5 is all about rigor and differentiation. We are going to mitigate the oh baby syndrome that might sound a little bit like this. Oh, my babies aren't ready for that. My students can't handle that. In School District of Lancaster, we believe that all students will have access to rigor, and by any means, whatever it takes, and through differentiation and scaffolds, we're going to ensure that our students get there. Principle 6 is we're going to be a warm demander. When we think about that, we're going to create spaces that hold students accountable, but we're going to do that in caring ways. We're going to look at ways to restore the human spirit of our students and not demean and create systems where they can't show up. And language is everything. And so when we think about language, we're going to really be cognizant that we don't want anyone to check out because of language that we use that's uninviting and demeaning or demoralizing. The last principle, we believe in connectivity as well as individuality. We are a collective, we're a community of learners, and we can learn individually and we can learn together. So we create those systems. And so these are the 7 principles for culturally responsive teaching. The last piece that we look at is outcomes. And we know that we can't lead where we won't go. So we have to do this work internally. And that is the message that we continuously promote. And that first shift in our outcomes, next slide, please. We look at shifting our tone and depth of the conversations. This is when we can be introspective. We can be reflective and think about language that we use, how we as the adults show up for the students that we serve in SDOL. And so we know as a result of the deep equity work that there will be a shift in the tone and the depth of those conversations around students and families and academics and disciplinary practices. The next shift, next slide, please, is all around the improvement of the climate and inclusion of all of our students. Next slide. We're going to look at how can we impact that implementation of culturally responsive practice, not just within the classrooms, but within the organization. So when we think about creating offices that are warm and inviting to families, so not just the classroom environment, but the entire organization. And then next slide. When we think about our last outcome, we will see a significant reduction in those historical educational disparities that have impacted students of color for years. And we're looking at that reduction in those disparities across all dimensions of difference. Thank you. Dr. Martin, next slide, please.
Thanks, Nicole, for giving us an overview of what the district is learning for our community and parents. Please feel free, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A, and we'll get back to you right away. If you have questions, anything about Nicole's presentation or what something means or anything about the district, please do. The next portion is our Equity Steering Committee that is representative of our community. We have teachers, administrators, students, board members, family support, parents. We have some of those here tonight. And each one is going to introduce themselves before they present, so you know who they are and who they represent. And then they're going to tell you a little more about the equity work at SDOL.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joseph Torres, and I am the Dean at Washington Elementary. And I have been part of our equity work since its inception back in 2017 and 18. We started first as a design team, a small team looking at data and focusing on a specific issue. That issue ended up being our suspension of Black males. And then from there, we did some work, which we'll expand on later. But one of the things we said was we wanted to look at the district as a whole. And as a small group, we knew we wouldn't be able to do this alone. So we have expanded our group, as Dr. Martin said, to include more teachers, more administration, parents, which were missing in our first group, having our support professionals, also having school board members. So it's a group that is very inclusive of our district, and which has helped us really address many different issues, as you'll see in the next upcoming slides. So as the team presents, they will be presenting themselves. So I'm going to let the next person go.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Thomas, and I'm the Secretary of the Families in Transition Program. And tonight I will be talking to you about what is educational equity. Educational equity means that every student has access to the resources and educational rigor they need at the right moment in their education, despite race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, family background, or family income. In other words, this is just not giving them the same resources, but providing resources that are tailor-made according to the student's need. Next slide, please. Why a focus on racial equity? To dramatically improve experiences, outcomes, and life options for students and families who have been historically underserved by our institutions and systems. It's a focus on racial equity will also provide outcomes for other identity groups of our students, such as Latinx, LGBTQ+, etc. Next slide, please.
My name is Katrina. I am a parent. I have 3 children in the district, and I joined the committee this year. I am talking to you about what we have done so far with the committee. Equity work in the committee began in the 2019-2020 school year when SDOL implemented deep equity training for all staff. These trainings focus on inclusion, equity, and implicit biases. The next thing we did was a mentor program that was geared to Black males in 6th grade. That was launched at Lincoln Middle School and is still going successfully. And now this school year, McCaskey is proud to offer 2 new courses in African American literature and ethnic studies. Next slide, please.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ryan Schlinkman. I'm the principal at Lincoln Middle School, and I've been honored to serve on the equity team since its inception in 2017. As a result of our equity work, many of our schools have developed their own equity projects within their school and their staff and their learning communities in order to reinforce the importance of our equity work. On this slide, we've briefly highlighted some of that work that's happening, and it ranges from the Black History Conference that occurred at Buchanan, engagement with various community organizations, book studies at both Lafayette and Washington, and at Lincoln Middle School, we've developed an equity website for our staff, for our students, and for our families. And I'll promote that. You can visit that at lms4humanrights.com. Next slide, please. Additionally, as a direct result of the foundational work of the equity team, we set out to develop and implement a mentoring program, which was committed to working with our 6th grade young Black men. Our goal was to impact these students through mentoring, and I'm proud to report on behalf of the equity team and Lincoln that we've seen tremendous growth in this program, both for individual students, but also for the program itself as well. Since we started the program, we've been able to maintain monthly sessions, which we're especially proud of because this is true even during the closure of schools during the pandemic. And we've just recently restarted our in-person sessions, and we'll have our second in-person session since restarting them next week. In addition to the monthly sessions, many of our mentors maintain even more consistent and regular interaction with students in order to and focus on maintaining very strong and positive relationships, not just with the students, although that is the primary focus, but also with the families of the students as well. So we look forward to the growth of this program. And as we go forward, you can look for a video that the district has put together highlighting some of the mentors in the program and the students themselves. Thank you. Next slide.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Howard Hanson, and I've been with the district since 2002 when I started at what is now Southeast. I'm currently the interim assistant principal at McCaskey, and this year we launched the Youth Equity Stewardship Program, which is actually the youth arm of the Corwin Initiative. And what we've basically done is focused on ways to engage our young people in being their own advocates and giving them voice and choice in what happens. We've met several times over the course of the year, all of it virtually, and had some really powerful sessions, which are going to culminate in our Unity Month in May. And what we'll be doing there is celebrating our cultural and international diversity as we strive towards addressing our intersectionalities and how we embrace our social, emotional well-being and strive to make sure that this equity process is about what we do for students. Sometimes when we talk about equity, a lot of people think about it as a top-down initiative and that we're pushing this on our teachers and our community. But this initiative started with students coming to us and explaining the disparities they were feeling in their honors programs. And what we're trying to do at this point with the Youth Equity Program is to make sure that all the adults in the system continue to hear from the young people about what it is that this process called learning means to them and how we can ensure their academic success. Next slide, please.
Hi, my name is Jessica Sponsler. I'm a parent. I have 2 girls in the district, and I was asked to join the committee almost a year ago. It was early last summer. And so I've been helping with the work of the steering committee and the policy development. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that we set principles for ourselves in this work. There's a commitment that each of us have made to following principles of creating environments that students feel seen and welcome, of building the will, skill, and knowledge of staff, and eliminating barriers. We are all taking these very, very seriously in everything that we do. And I think it's just critical for me as a parent to understand, and I think for the rest of you too, to understand that we are being very mindful of our impact on your kids with the work that we're doing here. And know that everything that we're doing is based on these principles. Next slide, please. So this is our charge. This was what we were asked to do as the steering committee. And I think that it's something that it should be highlighted that we're looking at data that the district has collected over the years. We're looking at best practices from other districts and from experts in equity work to inform our recommendations, to make sure that we're helping the district as a whole. These are not things that are just coming from a single source. Okay, we're not just looking at one, hiring one advisor to come in and talk to us. We're actually doing a lot of research and really diving into the data so that we are making very informed decisions for the kids and also for the teachers and other staff that are going to be affected by these policies. There's just no point in this if we aren't being intentional in the development, implementation, and assessment of these equity policies. So that is also on our minds in our work that we're doing here as a committee. Next slide.
So as we see these principles and our charge, the work is a lot. And so we are now in that really research and identification stage. And we have split up our team, our big team, into 2 committees, one of them focusing on creating an equity report card. That's led by myself and Jasmine Torres, one of our principals at the high school. And then we are also drafting an equity policy to be reviewed by our school board and recommended to, so that we can recommend to our school board. And that's being led by Melanie Abney and Howard Hanson. So we're going to dive in this next slide into some of that work that we're doing. So for the equity report card, what we really are doing right now is diving into the data in these specific focus areas. And the district has focused on climate and culture, academic performance and growth, and also college and career readiness, some language that we've been using throughout our years as Dr. Rao and Dr. Pao as our leaders. So what we wanted to do was dive into what does that really mean? So in our climate and culture, we're really looking at that quality of teaching. So we want to dive into the staff demographics, the discipline and the attendance. Staff demographics being, how many teachers of color do we have? Black teachers? How many Hispanic teachers do we have? How many Caucasian teachers do we have? We then want to also look at the academic performance areas. We want to look at our 6th grade tracking, how many students are being placed in special ed, and how many students have access to our high-level courses. Then we are also looking at our other band, which is our achievement equity, which is what's going on with our graduation rate. When our 9th graders get to the high school, are they passing and moving on? And where's our 3rd grade? So we really are looking at all different areas of our district in terms of academic, but also the college and career readiness, because that's our goal, to make sure our students get to college or be ready for a career. And then really that climate and culture. And so what we're doing right now is getting all of this data so that we can push them back out to the public. What are the numbers telling us? Not us saying what this is, but what are the numbers telling us? And then really drafting some plans and policies around that. So I'm going to turn it over to the policy group.
Good evening. My name is Melanie Abney, and I'm the school counselor at Hamilton Elementary, and I'm also one of the leaders of the Equity Policy Subcommittee. And one of our main objectives was to develop an equity policy for our district, and we are in the process of doing that now. And we're also in the process of presenting that and sharing it with our teachers and our support staff, the students, the parents, and the community stakeholders. We want to share the policy with all of these groups so that we can gain your feedback and your input on the policy. And then we plan to present the final draft of the equity policy to our school board on May 4th, 2021. And we want their consideration, and eventually we hope that they will adopt it and ratify it so we can put it into place. So as we were developing the equity policy, we took a comprehensive look at a variety of equity policies from school districts across the nation. In fact, we looked at Pittsburgh, California, New Jersey, Maryland, several other states. We looked at their equity policies. And with that research and looking at that very closely, we were able to then gain a better understanding of how to develop an equity policy for our district that's unique to the specific needs here in Lancaster. And now I'm going to pass it off to the other leader of the policy, Mr. Howard Hanson.
Thank you, Melanie. So what we did was that we actually worked very extensively on the preamble and statement that would encompass our underlying why. And when we needed advice, we actually consulted with Dr. Heather Bennett of the Pennsylvania School Board Association, because in June of last year, the PSBA actually created an equity template and handbooks for districts seeking to adopt an equity policy. And this was absolutely invaluable. And the next time we met, we were actually able to divide the work into discrete bits and work collaboratively in pairs to begin to lay out the policy. Now, what we have is a rough draft that's almost ready for the light of day. There are a few revisions that we need to make and some fine tuning that we still have to do before we can present it to the community for feedback and revisions, so that when we do present it on May 4th, it will be a document that is more or less ready to go, and just dependent on what the board has to say about how they would like us to revise it and refine it. What we really want to do is to make equity foundational to everything that we do in the district, from curriculum to hiring, from discipline to student services, from how we interact with parents to how we envision the possibility of a gifted education for all our students. We want to make equity the lens through which we see the world. We want to make it foundational and inextricable from everything else that we do as educators, because our students deserve an education system that does everything possible to ensure that they have the resources necessary to be successful, regardless of the zip code in which they live. Next slide, please.
Thank you, team. This is the Equity Steering Committee. So in terms of next steps, we want to be sure that our students, our staff, and our community feel heard. We do that by demonstrating urgency in responding to questions and concerns. One of the questions on tonight's Q&A feature was about, how can you help? How can our community help? And one of the ways that you can help, one of the most important ways, is by talking to your neighbors, talking to our representatives, our senators, our legislators, about passing the fair funding formula. The fair funding formula is a formula that gives districts resources, money, based on district needs, so that there is an equitable way to distribute that funding. For example, in the school district of Lancaster, we have many children, about 20% of our children actually, who take advantage of our English language learning department, right? And this is, by the way, by law. We must provide for our students. And so we have about 75 English language developer teachers that we pay for because we want our kids to have the best. There are other districts that don't have to spend any of their money that way. And so the fair funding formula would say to the legislators and to the community, we recognize and we realize that you have additional costs because your children might have additional needs. And so your district is going to receive additional funding for that. That is just one example. And without that fair funding formula, we continue to be underfunded. And how does that impact us? Well, if we had the funding that we really deserve based on our students' needs and our community's needs, because as you know, we also have some of the highest tax rates, right? And again, that's because we're not being fairly funded, which causes us now to have to go to our community to raise additional money. But how would we use some of that money if we had a fair funding formula? We might have reduced class sizes, right? So if we get additional funds, we could hire more teachers and therefore reduce class sizes. Another example is that many of our elementary schools have part-time after-school programs, maybe 2 days a week, maybe 3 days a week. But we know that our working parents would love to have an after-school program that meets the needs of children every single day, so that parents know that their children are in a safe place every single day while they are at work. And those are just two examples of how fair funding would benefit our district. And if you who are listening and you got a friend or relative, to make one phone call to your representatives, to your senators, one phone call or one letter or email. If we all did that, they would hear that the school district of Lancaster is together and that they need to be responsive to the needs of our kids. Now, we have plans to have many more town halls. As Mr. Hanson said, we're going to be bringing our draft equity policy to the community. But in addition, we want to make sure that you are aware that one, we will be posting a recording of this session. So please encourage your friends and family to go ahead and go to our website so that they can listen to this very important session. Number two, please be sure you also, when you go to that recording, also listen to our mentor video. Our mentor program has been phenomenal. And again, through fair funding, we would be able to extend that mentor program to other schools. And finally, we are asking for your input through what we call the thought exchange. Many of you have participated in different thought exchanges where the school district asks you a question and many of you reply with different responses, but also sometimes you get to just say, yes, I agree with that response. So we are asking that all of you please take a few minutes to reply to our thought exchange because we are interested in what you have to say. As I said, this is our first town hall. We want to have many more because we believe that the support of our community is vital. And so now I'm going to say goodnight to you and ask you to please listen to our next speaker, Crystal Martin, who will talk about the thought exchange and next steps. Thank you.
If you go to the Q&A, you will see a link to my thought exchange. So I'm going to give you a little time to do that. And if you click on that link, it's going to send you through a series of quick questions to first set you up. And then it's going to give you one simple question that we would love to hear from you and what you give your input as we continue to do this work. We would like your input. So the question is simply about what we can do as a district to empower others to have equitable opportunities. So if you could just give your thoughts on that thought exchange, that would be great. But we would like you to not just keep it to yourself, pass it on to your neighbors, your family, your friends at SUL, your community members. If you're connected to a nonprofit, please pass it on to them. We will be putting this thought exchange onto our website. We're going to be giving it to building principals so that they push it out through their social media contacts so that we are represented of equity and what we can do as a district to continue to move our district forward in knowing that we want to reach all students and all community, and that we are focused on what is best and right for our students. That's everything for this evening. We'll stick around for a while. Please put your questions into the Q&A, and we appreciate having you here tonight. And we look forward to the next time we have a town hall that we can share what we're doing in the district, in this community. Thank you all. Dr. Rao, I think there is a question in there and maybe you wanted to answer.
I can't find it, how to do this, how to answer the question. I've been trying, clicking on it. It doesn't give me the option. So if you could respond to Dr. Whitmer, the answer is yes. We will be using some infrastructure money to support some of this work, but know that that infrastructure money is very limited and is not sustainable. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to the next town hall.